dealing with hay fever. Is that something that you're still dealing with, or?
Yeah, well, I used to as a child have it really bad. You know, it would last for a good couple of months throughout the summer period. It was linked to other respiratory conditions. Um,
I'm not really sure what hay
I,
fever is.
yeah, well, I don't know whether people have an official line as to what it is. But effectively, it means that it's almost like an autoimmune.
Okay.
So the body is treating this allergen as an invader, and therefore it overreacts to that allergen in the form of grass pollen or tree pollen, etc. And luckily, over time, it started to dissipate, started to improve. Uh, but my gardening job put me in the firing line. About quite often I'm weeding or I'm digging a hole right next to ornamental grasses. So I'm right there in the firing line. And it definitely brought my hay fever back a little bit more recently. So when I say linked to respiratory conditions, so before I had exercise related asthma, and I got rid of that through breathing techniques. So if you look at the Buteyko breathing technique, I combined a bit of that with the Wim Hof method, and I no longer have asthma. It was great to go to a doctor and the doctor tell me, yes, Mr. Florence, you no longer need your medication. I don't quite know how you've done it, but you don't need it. And it's a lovely thing to be told, as I'm sure you know. So, yeah, the hay fever, this year, it lasted 2 weeks. So nothing severe, but it just meant a few days, especially when I was gardening at a client's garden. My eyes were streaming, my nose was running. I was, my head was dizzy, and it's quite a debilitating thing when you're trying to do a job.
Yeah, I bet.
Um, but hey ho.
Yeah, I can definitely relate too, because I played soccer a lot growing up,
Mm.
and I had the same thing. They called it at least athletic-induced asthma. And slowly, by doing different things, the most efficient one being the Wim Hof breathing.
Mm.
I'm not sure if you experience the same thing, but I can almost feel like after like just a couple months of doing it or so,
Mm.
like it's kind of like I felt like my breathing was like this before.
Mm.
It's very
Yeah,
narrow, and then
shallow. Yeah.
well, felt like it was much more open,
Mm.
much more clear. And I can realize because I've had times where I might not do my exercises for like a month or something,
Mm.
and then you can realize things getting constricted again,
Mm.
and then all these different things. It sounds like I did one of your videos today actually for the morning. We were 108 breaths. I
Yeah,
assume
thank you. Yeah.
related to soma breathing.
No, so that's not soma breath. This was something I learnt along the way. It's related to a qigong practice.
Mm.
Um, so with soma breath, it's a bit like Wim Hof in that you have the breath retention phase as well. So you do exhale breath retentions and inhale breath retention. Whereas with this 108 breathing style, it's much more about just harnessing the energy of the earth and building up that energy, which is why I like doing it in the woods.
Mm.
And all you're doing really is gentle inhale, exhale for 108 times, and it's you feel good by the end of it, don't you? It's a lovely kind of energizing breath. I mentioned in the video, I think this morning, that the number 108 is of particular significance to those that are either Hindu, or those of a particular yogic discipline background, or Buddhist. And I couldn't remember at the time, and I still can't remember. There is a particular significance to do with the sun, the earth, the moon, and how they relate. That's what the 108, I think, is something to do with it. It's a magic number of some kind. But either way, if you do it that many times and you breathe in that fashion, you feel good by the end of it. Nice and simple as well, isn't it? You can't possibly forget it.
Yeah, yeah, and I've experimented with other things. It's interesting, different religions, different techniques that use these kind of different numbers. Like
Mm.
I think I saw on your channel as well, but I've had experience doing like the 7 Tibetan rites.
Yeah, 5 Tibetan rites.
5 Tibetan rites. Mm,
Yeah.
okay, I've not sure there might be other ones, but
Mm.
just these interesting things that people have kind of left throughout history
Yeah.
for us that they had these things figured out thousands of years and we've
Yeah.
kind of lost some of them, and I see people like you and me digging back in history, trying to find these tools, these techniques that worked for people for so long.
Yeah. And you know what's funny? We've for a very long time thought that those, especially in hunter-gatherer times, had an average age of about, say, 35, 40 years.
Mm.
But in fact, they've recently discovered that that's all rubbish. Pretty much all that, in those times before agriculture, their average lifespan was the same as us, 7 decades. And the difference and the reason why we had that assumption that the average lifespan was so much less is because that child mortality affected the statistics. So obviously back then there were a lot more child deaths, there were a lot more women dying during pregnancy, which is obviously one of the benefits to modern medicine today. But in terms of the way they lived their life, how healthy they were, they didn't have the same disease. They hardly had any disease back then.
Mm.
All the disease that we now experience, all things like autoimmune. I mean, autoimmune is very new. All these things are stuff that we've created. And it doesn't take much for us to look at ancient wisdom to realize that if we start to harness that ancient knowledge and use it in our everyday lives, it's a great way of countering all the negative effects of what we currently have, because there are lots of negative things going on around us, as we know. So ancient breathing techniques. I mean, you've experienced plant-based medicine.
Mm.
Hell of a lot that I'd love to explore on that. I've still not done ayahuasca. I'd like to give that a go. And I looked at your video. What a great report on there, by the way. That was amazing, of your experience. I love the video when you talk about the scary side of it, in that it shows you your true reflection, which can be scary. I love the bit as well when you talk about men showing their emotions. That itself can be scary for a lot of Western blokes.
Yeah.
Because we've been brought up stupidly in this odd way, haven't we? Don't show emotion. Even right down to things like in Western society. I'm sure the Victorians have a lot to blame here, but that children should be kept in their own room from an early age, and that's something that I believed actually not so long ago with my son.
Mm.
Whereas if you look at hunter-gatherers, if you look at ancient people, children lived and breathed in very close proximity to their family. They would sleep next to their mum and their dad. So in other words, even when they were a baby, they didn't feel abandoned, which I think probably babies do feel. I might be wrong, I don't know, but it would be easy to assume that some of the psychological conditions that we have today are because of the way that we bring children up now.
Yeah.
I've gone into a long ramble now, sorry. I have a tendency to do this.
No, that's totally fine, man. I totally agree with what you're saying. I think society, so much of the time, like we get stuck in these paths that are ingrained in us in such an early age. And sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes it's a bad thing. And just what I love doing is looking back at history and seeing how people live differently. So one thing that kind of came up was studying these different native cultures. And what a lot of them would do was the woman would sleep with many men.
Mm,
So they wouldn't
yes.
know who the biological father was.
Yeah.
And because of that, you'd have a group of like 10 men taking care of one child.
Mm.
So you'd have 10 father figures, 10 people looking out for you.
Mm.
Things weren't closed off. Like we were in these houses with big ass houses that we spend like, I don't know, maybe 20% of our day in, looking off into other people. And back then, everyone was living together in a tribe, in a group. And there's definitely some side effects that all these different things have on us. And just one other thing that I kind of thought about was another native culture. I forget the name of all these different things, but they believed that the first big mistake man made was when they started taking things from the earth and using them differently. So like taking oil out of the earth, like why would you take oil out of the earth? It's there for a reason. So taking that out of the earth, then we have these massive ships taking oil from one country, going over the ocean, like bringing to another country, obviously there's going to be oil spills, which then affects the ecosystem, which is then the food that we eat. Our pesticides go into the water. All these things have a side effect. And maybe that autoimmune or different things are starting to kind of catch up with us.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, agriculture is the biggest thing to blame. As soon as we invented agriculture, that made a big change in our lifestyle. I mean, when you read the book Breath by James Nestor, and that's a really good book, that he talks about even how our airways have disevolved over time. There's a reason why a lot of us suffer these respiratory conditions, is because when we were hunter-gatherers, and actually a little bit further on to that, we still had these bigger jaws. Our mouth and jawline would jut out slightly more. It'd be much more of an angle this way rather than internally. So therefore the airways were bigger. So nobody suffered from asthma. Nobody suffered from hay fever, other respiratory conditions. We were able to breathe much better. We slept at night very soundly, because we would have slept with our mouth closed. You know, as you probably know, the more you breathe with this over this, the more healthy and happier you become. So yeah, I mean, we've got a lot to answer for in this idea of enhancing and creating society. Most of it has had a detrimental effect on our health and actually our psychology. You know, even right down to things like, you know, if you think agriculture, at some point, somebody, once they realized that they could corral a whole load of horses or cows into one spot, and therefore made it easy for them to eat food, they then needed to hire somebody to offer some kind of security to prevent others from stealing those animals. So therefore, you know, this policing system was created. At the same time, they needed people to work the land. And that's where slavery started to, you know, come about. And so everything that's related to agriculture really was fairly negative and had a detrimental effect to human life. We didn't know it then. We've only recently figured it out now. You know, much of today's problems around wealth, land grabbing, you know, all the stuff that's happening these days, you know, right down to religion as well. Back then it was based on animism, wasn't it? You know, the whole idea that that you just believed in the gods were kind of the physical things around you. You had a much better connection spiritually with, which is why ayahuasca is great, isn't it? You get a connection with the earth and plants. And then somebody created polytheism and then monotheism. And again, that set us down quite tricky routes. I'm not going to go into that because that could be quite a tricky conversation, but you know what I mean? We haven't helped ourselves.
The reason why it's a tricky conversation, the same way with all religion, like one thing I tend to think about, like, is my mom was Jewish and my dad is Christian. So
Wow.
there's always been, it's at least always been in my mind, because in the Jewish faith, you're supposed to marry Jewish. So she was going outside of religion by doing so.
Yeah.
And same thing with my father, not necessarily his parents, but his parents' parents, his grandparents. She married someone that wasn't Christian, and then her father never talked to her ever again for her entire life. And
Wow.
so these things are very deep rooted inside of us. I think of it like a comfort zone, and you have this like circle, and each time you take a step outside the circle, things can get a little weird and get a little crazy, but your ability to learn and grow is expanding every time that you take a step outside that boundary.
Yeah. And you feel freer, don't you?
Oh my God, yeah.
I mean, as soon as you remove that dogma that's been ingrained in you, and it's through no fault of anybody either. You know, what with these self-limiting beliefs that we have, these templates that are created in our brain, are through no fault really of anybody in particular, or yourself. It's part of the way that we live. But I think if you can reach a point in your life when you think, okay, I don't need to listen to that anymore, and I can start to question, because when you question, then you start getting answers. They're not always answers you want, but you start getting answers that help you find a new way of living, and you know, a new path. It's that path less trodden, which is the most attractive to me now.
Yeah, and I definitely have some more I want to talk about. I just want to let you know that we're coming up on an hour, and I'm not sure, I don't want to take away from your time. If you'd like to keep going, just because I'm not sure with the recording, like when it actually started. So I
Yeah,
apologize to everyone for that, but I just want to make sure that you are good if you want to continue.
I'm good
All right, awesome.
for at least another 15 minutes or so.
Okay, perfect. We'll do another 15, like quarter after. So you mentioned like asking questions and maybe not liking the answer. I'm just wondering, is there any questions that you asked in your own life that brought you to some type of evolution or change?
Yeah, I think the more questions I've asked about myself, in other words, who am I? Um, yeah, I'd have to say, in the most part, I've not disliked the answer once I've figured it out, because it's always helped me. I think I'm kind of answering this. I hope this is a good enough answer. But when so many years ago, in 1992, I studied acting, and one of the first plays that I had to create was something that was entitled "Who Am I?" We all had to do the same thing, just a short little play entitled "Who Am I?" And in my play, um, I was seen on a train, and it was all mimed. Somebody creating the sound effects verbally, and it was really just me getting off a train. So there'll be I was stepping off the train, or going to step off the train, and then not knowing whether this was the right station or not. And it was really just a really simple analogy of not really knowing who I was, and not knowing whether the place that I was at was the right place or not. It was just a very simple thing. And I kind of remained in that state for much of my life after that, really, following other people's ideas, doing things that were easy because it meant that I didn't have to think, not finishing things because if I finished something and didn't like it, then it would be I didn't like the feeling. All these kind of, I shouldn't say weak, but softened psychological thinking that prevent you from enjoying your life. I lived that. And one of the things, I suppose, when I started posing questions about who I am since the evolution of Dave, was exactly that, the realization that I'd let life direct me rather than me direct my life. So I'd let other things take control. Although I had my own business, I only had my business because I was sacked from another company along with a friend of mine. We both said, well, we're probably not employable anymore. I mean, we were being slightly drastic there, dramatic. So let's set up our own company. So we set up our own company. But it was never done with passion. It wasn't done with any drive or energy. So it didn't really come to much. We earned an income, but it wasn't that great. So, that for me was a really good indication of how I used to live my life, letting other things almost dictate how I thought and the decisions I made at the time. So I hope that answers that question. That really, I suppose that was one of the things that I suppose I didn't like it, but I knew it. So it helped to know that I was able to accept the me that I was then, knowing that I could make a change. I think that's the key. For a lot of people, they go through life thinking, yeah, but these other people are special, or these other people that change their life and have these dramatic positive changes, it's because of something that they have in their life that's enabled them to do it. When in fact, everybody can do it. Everybody can change. Everybody can. And I take myself as a prime example. And I would have looked at videos of people having these amazing lives, making positive changes. And I would have thought, yeah, but okay, there's something special about them, or they're being helped, or, again, these limiting beliefs. And I think if there's anything that you or other people can take from this kind of conversation, I think, and not you, Carl, because you've already made some significant changes. I would imagine you've definitely been asking the right questions, is that as soon as you ask questions about how you're living your life and you get real answers, honest answers, at that point you can make changes.
Mm. Yeah, and sometimes those answers are scary.
Yeah, well, I tell you what, I love the fact that you did it as well, in part with the ayahuasca, I would imagine.
Pardon me?
I would imagine those questions, the answers of which came during the ayahuasca ceremonies for you.
Yeah, for sure. It was definitely a whole restructuring of kind of what I viewed reality as what it was.
Mm.
And but what got me there in the first place was years before, which was very similar to you asking the question of, because if you're at the point where you feel like you know who you are,
Mm.
I mean, the question of who you are, I feel at least, is a question that can be answered throughout your entire life.
Mm.
It's not just finding it out in this one instance, although you have these
Always.
revolutionary thoughts. It's a constant exploration of ideas and thoughts, and same way as a constant evolution. Like you're never at your end, you're never done. What you can do as you get older in a physical basis may change, but you can always improve, be a little happier, be a little kinder. And yeah, ayahuasca definitely opened my eyes to a whole lot of different things that allowed me to see things like that. Have you worked with any kind of plant medicines, anything related?
No, only in a fun setting. So when I was at university and for years after, I dabbled with all kinds of things.
Mm.
So of the kind of things that people turn to now, psilocybin, for its therapeutic benefits, I was dabbling with it for the fun experiences that can be had with all that kind of stuff. I was actually talking to somebody recently where they said that very soon there's going to be some clinics offering MDMA therapy, which really interested me because, of course, I spent many years taking MDMA, going to raves. I really was a full-on enjoyer of those um, hallucinogenic and fun pharmaceuticals that, I really was a part of the 90s rave generation. And, I would end up at power stations, disused power stations, and have these crazy raves, and go to caves and all the stuff that you hear about back then. I'd go to Berlin, just as the wall, a few years after the wall had come down. We'd have these amazing experiences, but of course, it wasn't done with the same kind of psychology that had if I did psilocybin, or if I did ayahuasca, or if I did anything that's truly plant-based medicine now. I'd be doing it with a very different psychology, and go into it probably with some trepidation because of my experiences before, but go into it hoping that I'd gain or learn something by the end of it.
Yeah, very cool. And I think that's the same with everyone. I know for me, it's the same way. Like drugs have always kind of like fascinated me. Just like the mind is what I'm always interested in. Like how can the mind change? Because a lot of people talk about like changing belief systems or destroying poor belief systems and creating new ones. But there's a lot of talk about it, and like to actually do that, I've only seen so many tools work for me in my own life that have actually been like a catalyst for actual change. And I'm certainly not saying that these things are for everyone. I actually just had a podcast with Josh Coleman where we talked about this as well. But everyone is a little different in the tools they use to help them. For someone, it's going to be just some yoga and meditation, and that's going to bring them to the same point. For someone else, it's going to be going to the jungle and doing ayahuasca. And for me, like, I've always kind of had almost, in my younger years at least, definitely a selfish point of view of like, I want to use these things to improve myself. And I was usually doing it to get better at poker. I played poker professionally before starting this.
Wow.
And it was always a way of improving my mind, trying to think quicker, trying to think deeper, trying to get power, really.
Mm.
And what I didn't realize with almost so many avenues I've taken, like I started meditation to try to get better at poker. And it
Wow.
started me off on this whole spiritual journey where eventually, years later, I'm in the Amazon jungle in complete darkness about to take ayahuasca.
That's
And the
amazing.
same reason I thought ayahuasca would help me improve my poker, improve my life. And instead, it showed me a whole different life philosophy, a whole new experience of life. And it completely did change me. It still is changing me. It's still doing things that uh, make the decisions I make today. So it's kind of funny, like you might not always have the best intentions when you fall into one of these things, but sometimes I think we all get to this certain point anyway where um, just the pursuit of, like, there's a really good quote by Earl Nightingale. I'm not sure if you know who he is.
No.
He's supposedly the person who started like the self-help, personal development era kind of thing. And he has a lot of cool little things out there. But success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. So you will feel happy, you will feel successful as long as you are progressively moving towards a worthy ideal.
Mm.
And
Like
that
it.
is why your channel interests me so much, because I can see you moving towards a worthy ideal
Mm.
and bringing people with you, which is
Mm.
one of the coolest things that someone can do, I think.
Yeah, thank you. I would imagine you're doing the same. I think it's this funny thing where I was talking to somebody about this earlier, that when you learn something, especially something that's a natural method or practice, that by the end of doing it, you feel amazing. You can end up evangelizing about it, as I did when I started doing the Wim Hof method. I wouldn't shut up about it. People would say, Dave, will you stop talking about cold showers? And but you can't help it, because you're wanting to tell other people about it. The thing is, when you tell people, especially those closest to you, about these methods and practices, very few of them will listen, because you're telling them. If they hear it from somebody else, they might well listen, but because it's you, they're not going to listen. So therefore, going down the platform of YouTube and the way that we're both putting out these messages is the perfect way of doing it. Because I know now, without being arrogant, that I know that some of what I put out there resonates with some people, and I know that because I get comments from people saying thank you, and it's a lovely thing to open up your computer in the morning. We're going back to the whole technology thing, and obviously all technology isn't bad. It's given me a chance to do this, and one of the things that I enjoy about it actually is opening up and seeing comments from people, not thanking me necessarily, but saying, I've just tried this, it felt great, or thank you, I'm now going to look at this, or by the way, Dave, have you tried this? And I love reading those. It's a lovely way of connecting with others that are clearly tapping into this journey that we're both on. And I by the way, I think you're probably the same, but this is a journey, I believe, for life. At no point will I ever think I've figured it all out. For me, it's a way of collecting information, knowledge, and quite often probably having a different opinion to what I did 2 years ago. But not having a problem with that, because you can have an opinion. It's a bit like what you were saying there around personalities and the way that we change as we get older, that we are always learning, we're always growing, we're always developing our ideas and life philosophies.
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful way to end it off, unless you have anything else. And I'm also curious to how people can get in touch with you. And
Yeah, so if somebody is interested in enhancing their life physically and mentally, then do come and join the Facebook group, the Tribe of Evolutionaries. It's just a really nice group. I'm pretty disciplined as far as me being the admin is concerned. If anybody's not very nice in there, we've not really had that, but if anybody were, then I'd remove them pretty quickly. It's not that kind of group. We all come from different backgrounds, different philosophies, different religions, different ideas, but we're very accepting of everybody else having a different opinion and trying new things. So it's at the moment, and I hope it remains that way, it's a great group for that. People can learn from the different things that we're experimenting with, be it longer fasts, be it experimenting with the Wim Hof method, Soma breath, with binaural beats, with calisthenic, all these kind of things. We're just experimenting with it, and it's just a lovely group, an open, safe group to talk about it. Then if somebody wants to come and join my channel, subscribe to that. I'm putting out fairly regular videos. I'm doing quite a few live videos now as well.
I've noticed.
Where I just kind of ramble on. So a lot of what I do comes from inspiration. So in the morning, that's when I get most inspiration. So all of a sudden I'll go, oh, there's an idea. I should tell people about that. So I'll just hit live and ramble on. Or just contact me. My email, david@daveflorence.com.
Very cool.
Yeah, or via Facebook, you'll see me there, The Evolution of Dave.
Yeah, and I'll put all that in the description box down below for anyone who's interested. Dave, it was an absolute pleasure. And yeah, I'm sure maybe we'll do this again sometime.
I hope so, Carl. Yeah, that was really cool. Thank you. I really appreciate you giving me a chance to chat here. I know I appreciate I've been doing more of the chatting, so sorry about that if I've been rambling. I was expecting you to do more, given that you've just had your coffee after the first 30 days.
Nice meeting you, man.
And you, sir. Good luck on everything you're doing.